Jesus freak here, and you've probably occasionally heard me mention that I had issues with the study notes in this version or that version, which honestly I very often do. My cat's down here. So what would my ideal study Bible be like? Well, you really want to know? You really want to know? That said, I've considered the possibility that maybe with a little bit of a hand, because I'm not really good at writing stuff, and since it's not good for just one person to be writing all the notes, because obviously theological bias, that maybe what would be a good idea would be to find some help and create a study Bible. And I've thought about it. The fact that I'm terrible at writing, I mean, I was a C English student. That probably surprises you. But yeah, I was a C English student. English was my worst subject. I would absolutely need help. Now, I would have to operate under conditions that might make it hard for myself and others. The first would be that the textual base would have to be a standardized Cambridge KJV text. And certain assumptions would have to be made. Like, I can't say, oh, the Greek this, the Hebrew that. Because I have to operate under the assumption that the KJV is literally all there is to work with. Because I don't want to confuse anyone by saying, this says this, but it should say that. Causing confusion. You know, what Paul said about God and confusion. And I'd have to make assumptions that maybe I'm not too keen on. Like the literal Mosaic authorship of the first 5 books, right down to the last paragraph. The tradition holds that he saw the master copy in flaming scrolls on Mount Sinai and transcribed it 13 times. Once for each of the tribes and once for the Levites. And I have to promote that even though I don't necessarily agree with that. As well as Matthean primacy and the Hebrew Matthew, what's the word I'm looking for? Hebrew Matthew hypothesis. I kind of have to assume that, even though I don't necessarily fully agree. But I mean, there's certain things about origins of the text that are pretty obvious. Like, even the most skeptical scholars can't deny that Acts is written by the same person as Luke. Or that 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, and the Gospel of John share a common author. Even if they might not agree that John the Elder is the same person as John of Patmos, it's pretty obvious that John the Elder and John the Evangelist are the same person, based on commonalities both between John and 1 John, and 1 John and 2 John, and of course 2 John and 3 John. So there's obviously connections between them that make it obvious that all of them share authorship. But there's one thing that I would be pushing that I do believe in, and that's the Pauline authorship of Hebrews. I know there's a lot of people out there who don't buy into that, and I do buy into it. Where a lot of the same people that believe some of the things I do about the Gospels are usually skeptical about Paul writing Hebrews. And here I am, I'm saying he absolutely wrote it. But like I said, there's so many different opinions about how to interpret things, and I need to make sure that my bias doesn't really show through, and that whatever comes out is little old orthodox. That it's the proper teaching, regardless of what I believe. So obviously I'm going to need a hand with that. Maybe if I get somewhere with it, I can look into having someone more capable than myself do the typesetting. Not that I'm not capable of it, but leave it to the pros, We'll see. It'll probably need to have a reference suite. I don't know whether I'd want to include the translator's notes or not. Personally, I do, but some people might find fault. Also, I'd like to include the original chapter headings, but there are some that some people find really problematic. Like, I think there were some in Isaiah that pushed the dual covenant theology that I push, and that I've gotten a lot of flack for. Because a lot of people believe in a two-covenant theology that's as the Jews have their own way to get to heaven and the Christians have their own way to get to heaven, which I think is in direct conflict with, and I've mentioned this a lot of times, direct conflict with John 14:6. Now, I know a lot of the people I talk to are Reformed and 4 or 5. Usually I find 4 pointers. I don't find, 5 pointers like James White. the type who believe that we're just, automata running on God's power or without any control. I tend to go more for the idea that our free will is corrupted rather than non-existent, which is more, Wesley than Calvin. But that's where I come from. And I understand a lot of things in very different ways. And maybe sometimes I understand things in the same way, but it just doesn't seem it because I refer to it in different terminology. But because I come from a Methodist, a Wesleyan, an Arminian perspective, and deal with people who come from a more Calvinistic perspective, which really both of these are reformed. It's just, Armin understood things a little differently than Calvin did. But there's not really that much difference when you really get down to the brass tacks. And I think I could probably manage to get through that. So we'll just have to see how things come out, if they do. Jesus freak out.